Hi, my name is Ashley and I'm a mom of two little girls. I have a 4-year-old named Kylie and I also have a 2-year-old named Mia. Now the topic for today's video is definitely a bit of a heavier one. It's a topic that most people really tend to shy away from, don't really want to think about or talk about until they're forced to confront it. And that is loss and death. And unfortunately, this is something that seems to be a theme in my life as of lately. And so I wanted to talk about that with you guys today from my perspective. I think that a lot of my videos in this Montessori at Home series on my channel tend to be very informative and upbeat. And I apologize if that's what you like about my videos. This may not be one of them. This is going to be more of like a from one Montessori parent to another, just kind of chit chat about my experience and how I have dealt with these very heavy topics in my home using a Montessori approach with my children. So if that's something that you're interested in sticking around for, then let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so I do want to start off with a bit of a little summary of the major events that have kind of led me to creating this video today, because I know that some of you are newer to the channel and you may not be aware of some of the previous circumstances that have happened. And so I want to get everybody on the same page, and then I will kind of dive into each of the things that happened and talk about it in relationship to how we handled things with our two girls. So about 1.5 years ago, my father very unexpectedly passed away of a heart attack, which was a very devastating experience to the whole family. And personally, it was my first experience with death in the family. Obviously, we did have the girls when that happened, but they were much younger than they are now. And so how we handled that was a little different than some of the more recent things. And then more recently, over the last couple of weeks, as many of you are already aware, my husband and I have been trying to conceive baby number 3. I was able to get pregnant after a couple of months, and unfortunately I suffered a missed miscarriage, which I'm actually still dealing with the after effects of right now as we speak. And it was actually my 3rd pregnancy loss that I have experienced over my journey of having children. So that's something that our family has been going through very recently. And then to top everything else off, yesterday morning, we suffered the loss of one of our 2 very long-time family pets, our dog Molly. Now, while I can't say that there is any one specific Montessori approach to handling these kinds of really tough situations with our children, I can confidently say that the Montessori approach does tend to go hand in hand with the ideals of respectful parenting and making sure that you're having very direct, honest conversations with your children, that you're not dancing around the issue, you're not lying to them, you're just making sure to be honest with them, and you're providing developmentally appropriate information at a level that they can mentally comprehend and process. And when our children do express their emotions with regard to any particular situation, whether that be actually telling us or being upset or maybe acting it out in their behaviors, that we are accepting of those emotions and that we acknowledge them and that we embrace them and allow our children to feel what they need to feel in order to process. So that's kind of the overall approach that my husband and I have taken in each of these very different situations. So backing up to what happened with my dad 1.5 years ago, the girls were both very young when he passed away. Mia was 6 months old, Kylie was 2.5. Unfortunately, both mine and Mike's families live in Florida. We are the only ones who live out here in Colorado. We don't have any immediate family nearby. And we typically really only ever get out to visit our families about once a year during the holidays, simply because of expenses. And a lot of it was also circumstantial over the last couple of years because I was heavily pregnant during some of the times, and I was I don't want to get on an airplane. And so it's been a bit hectic to try to have time to visit with our families. And unfortunately, because of that, Mia actually never had an opportunity to meet my dad before he passed away. Again, she was 6 months old. We actually were planning a trip the month after he passed away to actually go down and he would have met her for the first time. But he unfortunately passed before we had that opportunity. Kylie did have an opportunity to meet him the year prior, but unfortunately she was a baby at the time, and so she doesn't really have any recollection of that experience. So the only times that our girls really got to interact with him before he passed was via FaceTime. And we did that pretty regularly, but even then I feel like that's very different than being in person. And so when he passed, the fact that they were so young and that they didn't have that close physical, like in real life relationship with him, it almost made it a lot easier for the girls. And I hate to say that, but it's true. They didn't feel that loss quite so deeply as if maybe we lived closer and saw them on a much more regular basis. And so talking about it with the girls was pretty straightforward because Mia was a baby. She had no clue what was going on. And then Kylie was only about 2.5. And so she, like, even though she was cognizant, she could tell you that we were going to Florida for Papa's funeral. That's what she called him. And even though she did go to the funeral with us, I could tell that she wasn't 100% aware of the entire situation. She could verbalize what was going on, but I don't think that she truly understood the gravity of what had happened. And even knowing that, we did still have that conversation with her. We did explain that, Papa had had a heart attack, which means that's when his heart stops working, and that he passed away, which means that he died, and that he is, not going to be around anymore when we go to visit Nona. And I don't think I've ever shared this particular little story on the channel before, but I thought it was appropriate here just to give you an idea of kind of like where a 2.5-year-old is in dealing with the death of a family member. When we were actually at his funeral, right at the end, we went up to pay our respects at his urn because he was cremated. And Kylie said out loud in front of everyone in the funeral home to hear, "It's okay, Mommy, everybody dies sometimes." At which point everybody started laughing. It was like a small, tiny bit of comic relief in the tragedy that was the experience of going to his funeral. So we still had the conversation. She still can tell you today exactly what happened. She knows, and I think she understands it better now. But back then it didn't quite have as an emotional toll on her as I think it would have had she been older. Now, more recently, in dealing with the events of our pregnancy loss, I know that some families will choose not to say anything about it to the younger siblings until they feel like things are safe, specifically because things like this can happen. But we made the decision very early on to go ahead and share the news with the girls right away, even knowing that that was a possibility, simply because I knew that if we did experience a pregnancy loss, that I was going to be upset, that I was going to be grieving that loss, and I didn't want to have to hide that from the girls if they didn't know what was going on. I didn't want to create confusion for them around why I was feeling the way that I was. And so we went ahead and told them anyway and just kind of hoped for the best. And unfortunately, things did not turn out the way that we had hoped. So we then had to turn around and try to explain it to the girls at a level that hopefully they would understand. Now, when it comes to human anatomy and scientific terminology, we are also very open and honest with the girls about that as well. And so both of them are very familiar with the scientific names of all of our different body parts, especially those related to the reproductive system. We have this cute little book called Amazing You that has little diagrams in it and stuff that brings it down to their level, and they read it all the time. So they're both very comfortable with using these terms, and at least for Kylie, I know that she, I think, actually has a pretty good working understanding of how the reproductive system works, especially for females. And I've had many conversations with her about it. She can talk to you about menstrual cycles and all kinds of stuff. It's actually pretty amazing, like, what she's able to comprehend at her age. Mia, on the other hand, I think her understanding is still growing. She does imitate a lot of the things that she hears Kylie talking about, and she has a general idea, but again, I think her understanding is still developing. But it's because we have those kinds of conversations with the girls that it made it really easy when I did get pregnant to explain to them that there was a baby that was growing inside of my uterus. And at least, like I said, Kylie definitely understood what that meant. And so in the events leading up to finding out that we had had a miscarriage, I was obviously going to the doctor, I was having ultrasounds, blood work done, and even though the girls didn't come with me to any of those visits, they did overhear me talking with Mike about what had happened at each of the appointments. I actually showed them one of the ultrasound pictures before the miscarriage had happened, when there was a tiny little baby on there. And so Kylie was very aware of what was going on in general. And then the morning that I found out that I had actually miscarried was a pretty hard one to handle, and I was crying, and she came up to me and asked me, "Mommy, what's wrong? Why are you crying?" And I took that opportunity to just explain it very straightforward to her, exactly the way we had been talking about it the entire time, through my tears, obviously. But I said to her, I was like, "Listen, there was a baby that was growing, and unfortunately the doctor found out that the baby is not developing properly. It's not growing the way that it's supposed to. And that means that the baby is not going to be born, and that mommy is going to have something called a miscarriage, which is when the baby and the tissue and everything that was inside, it all comes out kind of like a period, because she knows what a period is. But I said kind of like a period, and that means that mommy and daddy just have to try again eventually." And it was an explanation that made sense to her. She was kind of like, "Oh, okay." And that was it. And so I had my time to grieve, and she went on about her business. But I know that she understood what had happened, because I heard her talking about it with Mike. Like, she brought it up of her own accord, and she was explaining to him. And then she would tell me, kind of randomly during dinner, she would say, "Oh, well, because the baby wasn't developing properly, or the baby's not growing anymore." And she understood what that meant. For Mia, again, she heard us talking about all of this, and she heard the terms that Kylie was using. I don't think she fully 100% got it. So I brought it down to her level. Like, she would still come over to me and point and say, "Baby, big sister," and she would point to my stomach. And I just had to explain to her gently that no, there's no baby anymore. There's no baby. Mommy and daddy have to try again. And eventually, after I would say about a week or two, she stopped doing that. She stopped pointing to my belly. And then she switched over to saying, "No baby inside anymore, no baby anymore," and in her own, way that she talks. And so it took her some time to comprehend that there was a baby and then there wasn't, but she eventually came around to that understanding too. And then as far as the emotional processing side of it, there really wasn't much emotional processing to be had, because I don't think they were very attached yet. Mia obviously had no idea what it meant for a baby to be on the way, because she's never experienced that. Kylie only has very vague memories of when Mia came home from the hospital. So she was excited about the idea of being a big sister again, and that there might be a baby that she could help with, because she's very into that right now. So she was excited about that, but it wasn't like heartbreaking news or anything like that for her to handle at this current age that she's at. And that brings me to the most recent event that I think really spurred me to sit down and make this video for you guys. And that was the passing of our dog Molly yesterday morning. Now, I know many of you are familiar with our dogs through seeing them in our family vlogs. Although they weren't in every vlog, they were in some of them, and oftentimes you would see them like kind of walking around or sleeping on their dog bed in the background while the girls were playing. And so Molly was the smaller of the two dogs. She was a 13-year-old Beagle mix. She was very elderly. I adopted her when she was 1 year old from a local shelter, and I have had her as my first ever dog that I adopted for the last 12 years. Over the last year or so, and more recently, I would say like in the last 4 to 6 months, both of our dogs actually, their health problems started increasing. You guys have seen us in many vlogs going to the vet to pick up medication, or going to the vet for a random ailment that popped up. They started having a lot of medical issues, primarily because of how old they are. And so we kind of had a feeling that this was coming at some point down the road. We just didn't know exactly when it was going to happen. And over the last month or so, Molly, her health started declining very, very rapidly. And she was not like herself anymore. She definitely seemed like her quality of life was really starting to suffer. And so Mike and I sat down and had a really serious, tough conversation about it. And we took her to the veterinarian for a more professional opinion. And they did agree that euthanasia was the most humane option for her at this point. And so yesterday morning, we had to say goodbye. It was definitely one of the toughest things that I've ever had to do. And I'm trying not to cry right now. Sorry. Yeah, it was a really tough decision. So going to that appointment Mike and I decided that we didn't want the girls to go with us because of what we had a feeling was going to be the outcome of the appointment. And we didn't want them to have to witness that happening at such a young age. If they were a little older and a little more capable of understanding what was going on and handling it, I think I would have absolutely allowed them to be there for it if they wanted to be. But at the age that they are, I just didn't feel like it was appropriate. So we hired a babysitter to watch the girls for the hour that we were at the vet's office, and we took Molly ourselves. And knowing that that was going to happen, we wanted to make sure that we gave the girls an opportunity to be with Molly and to say their goodbyes kind of in their own way while they still had an opportunity. So the night before, because the appointment was scheduled for the next morning, we sat the girls down and we explained, Molly is really old, which they know, they could tell you that themselves. But we explained, she's really old, and living creatures, dogs included, they don't live forever. And so, Molly, she's not feeling well anymore. And, the best thing is to put her to sleep, was the phrase that we used. She's going to go to sleep forever and she's not going to come back. And I think Kylie took it harder than Mia did. Sorry, this is still very fresh. Kylie definitely took it a little harder than Mia. She didn't cry, but I could tell that she comprehended what we were saying and that she was sad about it in her own way. She started saying some kind of like weird things that didn't really make any sense to us at the time, and I could see her kind of twisting her face in like a expression like she was trying not to cry. And I could tell that she was affected by that news. And so they had some time to cuddle with her, and we took a couple of pictures to make sure that we had one last memory of the girls with her. And so the next morning when we returned from the vet's office without Molly, Mia didn't really seem to notice. Kylie noticed, but she didn't really say anything. She didn't comment about it. She could see that Mike and I, we had been crying, so she could see that we were visibly upset. But again, she didn't really say a whole lot about it. And so we gave her that space to just kind of process what was going on, and we didn't force her to talk about it at all if she didn't want to. Later in the evening, Mike did ask her if she was sad at all. He just was trying to feel out, because she hadn't said anything at all, if she understood what had happened. And she definitely understood, and the way that she describes it to us is that it just feels weird that Molly's not here anymore, because she's so used to seeing her, walking around the house or sleeping on her dog bed. She says it just feels weird. And so I think that that's her way of describing, what she's feeling as she's processing this happening. Mia, on the other hand, very clearly still doesn't understand the concept, the permanency of death, and that it means, that creature or that person is never going to come back. And I think she actually forgot about the whole thing, because earlier this morning she went looking for Molly in the house and came back and asked me, "Mommy, where's Molly?" Okay, sorry if the angle changed. My battery died, but that was actually really convenient timing, because that allowed me to compose myself so that I could finish this very last part of the video for you guys. So when that happened, because this is still very fresh, I got really upset again, and I had to take a few minutes to compose myself. And after I did, I got down to her level and I put my hand on her shoulder, and I was looking her right in the eye, and I was desperately trying to think of a way to explain it in a way that she would understand. And so I think what I told her was, "Baby, Molly went to sleep forever. She's not coming back. We only have Patches. Patches is our only doggy now." And Patches was sitting on the floor next to us when that happened. And I could see her thinking about what I said. And she looked over at Patches, and then she looked back at me. And she said something to the effect of like, "No more Molly, Patches only," or something like that. She kind of repeated back what I said. And I do feel like to some degree it maybe did help. I'm not 100% sure, but I think she has a better grasp on the fact that Molly's not here anymore. But I really don't know, to be totally honest. I think as she gets a little older, obviously she'll understand. But as of this current moment in time, I think she forgets that Molly's not here now, and she's still a little bit confused about it. So we're still working through that with her. Okay, I totally sat down at the beginning of this video and thought to myself, this is going to be a really fast video, probably one of the shortest I've ever made on this channel. And now I'm thinking this is going to be one of the longer ones. So if you're still here watching, I genuinely appreciate that you sat through all the way to the end. And if you ever go through something like this with your children, I hope that hearing my stories, hearing how I experienced it as a parent for the first time and how we handled it with our girls, I hope that you find some, not inspiration, I don't feel like that's the right word, but like some help in some way, some guidance in how to handle it with your kids too, from a Montessori parenting perspective. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments down below. If you are interested in learning more about doing Montessori at home with your children or positive discipline parenting, I also offer a couple of e-courses that walk you through it step by step. So I will be sure to leave a link to that in the description box down below in case you're interested in learning more about it. And just in case you're new to my channel, and I really hope that you're not, because this would not be a very good first video to watch, but if you are new, I just want you to also know that this video is part of a much larger series on this channel all about implementing Montessori at home with our children. So if that's something that you're interested in potentially watching more of, then you might consider subscribing to my channel. This way you don't miss a new video, because I do upload a new one just like this one every single, well, maybe not just like this one, but a new Montessori video every single week. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.